is the recent Racism in the Book of Mormon, a Q&A, and a research article, basically primary sources dealing with this article issue, Racism in the Book of Mormon, primary sources. So for those who actually want a good article discussing the question of racism in the Book of Mormon, different perspectives, and also the sources themselves, be sure to check out this pretty important website. So, with that being said, Adam, again, thanks for coming on. And for those who may not have listened to the episode you appeared in, maybe if you were to give, like, say, a very brief biographical background, like, say, what's your background, what's your occupation, and so forth.
Would be happy to. So my background is I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ with the Elijah Message, not just a member, but an ordained elder and on the apostolic quorum for that church. We are a restorationist tradition, so like you guys, well, I would say the Community of Christ, but that's kind of controversial. But other restoration traditions, we're linked together by our belief in the Book of Mormon and the prophetic calling of Joseph Smith. My main occupation is that of a high school Latin teacher. I teach Latin level 3 at the Lawrenceville School in Lawrence, New Jersey, and I also am the reference librarian at the school there. Live in South Jersey with my wife and 2 kids, Grayson, who is 9 years old, and Gavin, who is 5 years old. My educational background is in religious studies. I studied Old Testament at Duke University. I majored in that. And I went on to do a MDiv at Yale Divinity School from 2003 to 2006. Long time ago in a galaxy far away.
You're also a Star Wars fan, so...
yes,
yeah.
Also a massive Star Wars fan.
Yeah. I like the original Star Wars, but once they introduced Jar Jar Binks and midichlorians, it's like, I'm out of here, but...
blasphemy.
Yeah, totally. Which kind of reminds me, hopefully I can have you on and Carl Cranny and some others, maybe like once in a while, to like maybe discuss the theology of certain Star Trek episodes like Darmok and stuff like that. But we can have...
Yeah, definitely. I love the shirt, by the way. I see Voyager there, the original Enterprise, the NX-01 Enterprise, which I actually really like. People bashed Enterprise for Scott Bakula. I actually kind of like that show. So go figure.
Go ahead. And of course, like, you appeared in episode 16, and I'll link to that, where you kind of go into more detail about your religious background, as well as the group you belong to, the Elijah Message with the Assured Way of the Lord. And also, I will include your author page on Amazon.com. You're in some books on, say, the Michigan relics, and a few other topics as well. So, okay, so the first article we'll actually probably look at is the Skins or Scales of Blackness, Semitic Context as Interpretive Aid for 2 Nephi 435, LDS 521. That was published in the Journal Book of Mormon Studies. And of course, like, I'll be linking to the 2 articles in the show notes as well, of course. So before we're going to discuss this, like, all books or all articles are like, they're intentional events. So, like, what made you want to write an article on this particular text and so forth?
Yeah, well, the impetus for this article came about during a really interesting time in my life. So I told you I have degrees from Duke and Yale, and I would have had one from Princeton. I was working on a PhD at Princeton, and that kind of fell through. It didn't work out. I had some trouble with my advisor and some other things. I mean, I would have done everything differently if I could go back and do it now. But in any case, long story short, didn't quite work out. So I had this knowledge of Hebrew and Greek through my comprehensive exams, through studying beginning in college with my studies of the Old Testament. And this was a couple of years after I became part of the restoration and was introduced to the Book of Mormon. I know in the last podcast, I talked to you some about that experience. And so something that was going through my head at the time was, how can I contribute to understanding the Book of Mormon using these skills that I learned for this PhD that I'm no longer going to get. So that led me to really addressing the question of what type of book is the Book of Mormon. And in my reading of it, and other scholars have had this situation as well, you'll find a lot of things that are kind of funky and interesting about the Book of Mormon, mainly these Semitic idioms. Now, a lot of people talk about chiasmus. That's the big one. There's some other ones as well, especially in the Book of Alma. So like the fluctuation between the word for word and the word for things, which is the same in Hebrew, devar, devarim. You get that all throughout Alma. and you also get the repetition of the conjunction and or avav all throughout the Book of Mormon. So the Book of Mormon, if you look at the 1830 edition, it will often contain the conjunction and repeated multiple times where you don't need it. And that's clues to people that we're dealing with some type of Semitic text undergirding the Book of Mormon that Joseph Smith translated. And I wanted to see whether some of these Semitic features could inform us about a very important issue in the Book of Mormon, namely the reference in Second Nephi to the Lamanites turning black, which has often been a very problematic verse. I talk about this in my article. This is one of the reasons that the Community of Christ rejects the Book of Mormon, because they think that it has kind of these racist views from the 19th century. And I wanted to see if there was another way to look at this based on Semitic understandings of the text that might inform us into ways to read this text differently, if that makes sense. I know I kind of went off there.
No, that makes sense.
I noticed, so people talk about Second Nephi 4 and 5 all the time, usually in criticism of the Book of Mormon, in criticism of the Restoration, but they don't talk about anywhere else where this content appears. And they don't talk about some of the positive references that we get to race in the Book of Mormon. So again, in Second Nephi, that same book that people criticize, you have the famous phrase that God rejects nobody who comes to them, black, white, slave, or free. But you also have, more specifically, the Second Nephi 4 and 5, you have later on statements that seem to suggest that the skin of blackness is not really skin at all, but scales of blackness. So the scales fall off of the Lamanites, and they're able to, after these scales have fallen off, they're able to come to God, to worship God, and to be accepted by God. So what's going on there? But scales here in one part of the Book of Mormon, and its skin here. Is there any type of nuance into how we can translate Second Nephi, this material in Second Nephi? And so that made me go basically to my Brown Drivers Briggs from graduate school and look at kind of the semantic range for the term for skin, or in Hebrew, and then in Aramaic. And I found in Aramaic, over and against Hebrew, I found in the Aramaic that can not only mean skin, but it can also mean shaft or scales, or something that's impermanent, something that falls off when something else happens. So in the book of Daniel, you have the kingdoms of the world are as shafts, so they're going to get destroyed, and basically they're going to the shaft is going to fall off, and the kingdom of God will appear on earth. So I used that reference in Daniel to suggest a different type of reading. I call it a Midrashic reading in the article, a different type of reading of Second Nephi, understanding the skin to possibly be scales of, how can I put it? Scales of blindness towards God's word, towards accepting God's will. These scales, this shaft is removed, and then the Lamanites are able to accept God's word.
Okay, well, that's a very good TLDR version of things. So, maybe if we were to go back and we can work through, a few things as well in the article. First and foremost, it sounds like you actually believe the Book of Mormon is what it claims to be, a translation of an ancient text.
I absolutely do believe that, yes.
Same here.
It's funny, Robert, because I told you my conversion experience in the last podcast. I didn't know anything about the Book of Mormon. Like I said, I read it at a hotel. I didn't know anything about it. It was just, I had an experience where I knew it was true. So I came to the Hebrew and Aramaic stuff and applying that to the Book of Mormon, not as apologetics. It wasn't like, oh, I did this in-depth research of the Hebrew and the Aramaic, and this made me believe in the Book of Mormon, but it was actually after the fact. It was a way of confirming what I already believed, what I already knew to be true.
Yeah, and I kind of bring it up just because it's obvious. And by the way, I agree completely with you. The claim otherwise is heterodox and blasphemous, I would say. But and that kind of comes out in the article. The assumption and importance of it being the historical text and translation. But like many people who comment on this, even those who are well-meaning, maybe friendly towards the church, like Mueller and others, they don't accept it as a translation of ancient text. So how do you think that kind of pun unintended kind of colors how one perceives and this kind of exegetical issue when it comes to, say, skins of blackness, scales of blackness?
Yeah, I think it's really difficult to get around kind of statements in the Book of Mormon. First off, I think that with any text, I would say it's about the Old Testament as well. I think that a knowledge of the original language is necessary to best understand text. Not that you can't understand it without the language skills, but I think that the language skills open you up to seeing things that you would not normally see. So to scholars who just say that this is something that Joseph Smith invented or that it's inspired fiction, I've heard of other statements as well, other arguments as well. I think you're really missing the central claim of the Book of Mormon. Joseph Smith said, this is an ancient record that I translated. And the Book of Mormon itself says, like you said, in 1 Nephi chapter 1, this is from Reformed Egyptian, the language of the learning of the Jews and the language of the Egyptians. Egyptian, whatever that Egyptian is, Egyptian itself is a Semitic text. So you're denying the actual claims of the Book of Mormon itself. Later on, Mormon, I believe, says, if I had bigger plates, I would have written in Hebrew, but I can't. I don't have bigger plates, so I got to write in this Reformed Egyptian, which is similar to Hebrew. But if you had Hebrew, this would be a perfect record. So you're denying the claims of the Book of Mormon itself, in my opinion. And I don't mean to be combative here, but you're denying the central claims of the Book of Mormon itself when you're saying that there's no Semitic Vorlage, no Semitic text that's undergirding it. Because I think the Book of Mormon and the early traditions, Joseph Smith, Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer even, make it very clear that this was some type of Near Eastern text that was being translated.
Yeah, my friend, and you actually referenced the article in this paper, Stephen Smoot actually has an article by the Interpretive journal, the Imperative for Historical Book of Mormon, where it kind of goes through like the nonsense, and I'll be blunt, it's nonsense of the inspired fiction thesis.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with Smoot totally on that.
And Smoot's like, he's been a good friend of mine for like 15 years, so I love the guy. Oh, wow. But it's a nonsense thesis because it just doesn't, it has no explanatory power, and you have to conclude either Joseph and or God were being deceived. Well, being deceptive, I should say. Yeah. But
and I'd like to add something. I think that's a great point. If you look at, so the Book of Mormon often gets cataloged as kind of this American religious literature of the 19th century. And if you look at the Book of Mormon, its claims are completely different than what you have, for example, with the Aquarian Gospel of Jesus or the Ahapse Bible or the Jefferson Bible. This isn't like this isn't like Jefferson, taking stuff out of the, chopping up the Greek New Testament. It's not like the Eurasia Bible where, this guy is saying that he's inspired in his head. Same with, the Aquarian Gospel of Jesus. This is Joseph Smith is actually making a deliberate claim. I have these plates, and I have these plates. They're written in the ancient language. They're written in a Semitic language, and God has given me the gift to translate them. And the funny thing is that even Mormon critics like John Dehlin and Bill Reel, they won't deny the existence of the plates. They'll just say that Joseph hammered them out. So Joseph was this perfect metallurgist who was able, to hammer out these plates. So, which is utterly absurd. If you're gonna admit the plates, and just admit that Joseph Smith was a prophet and received, plates from God. But I'm going on a rant here. I'm sorry.
Oh no, that's okay. Go ahead. Like, I feel very passionate about Book of Mormon historicity as you do. I mean, well, I do believe there could be like exaggerations and stuff like that in the text, like you do have in the Bible. At the same time, the claim that there was no historical Nephi, and no historical appearance of Jesus. I mean, no. no. I definitely believe
all the. I believe that the historians, Mormon and stuff, may have embellished some stuff, but the history is accurate, and the characters were there, and they were real. They were real human beings. Nephi, Lehi were just as real as you and me. And I think there's some archaeological evidence to support that as well. So,
well, yeah, and of course, like we disagree as to where it took place in the New World, but like at least in the Old World, there's a
in the Old World,
growing body of hard evidence, like Nahum and Bountiful.
Nahum, yeah, I was just
and the responses, of course, he's like, it's only 3 letters. It's like, no,
no, and the area where it's situated in, and the trajectory that the Book of Mormon describes Lehi as going is right there. So come on now.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And my friend Neil Rapley and others have done like very good work on the old world geography of the Book of Mormon, such as Neil's recent presentation on Ishmael in Nahum and other really
Yeah.
cool stuff.
Yeah.
So,
That's
but
excellent. That's excellent work there. Yeah.
oh yeah, he's done good work. So before we're gonna go into like the article, like you can bring up some linguistic issues. Like there's a debate between like Book of Mormon scholars, not just LDS scholars, but like believe in Book of Mormon scholars from
Yeah.
the various traditions, as to like say the exact relationship or the language of Nephi's plates. Was it Hebrew using Egyptian characters? Was it a mix? So
Yeah.
how do you have a certain take, if you will, on how to interpret 1 Nephi 1:2 about like the language of the Egyptians and learning of the Jews?
I'm really kind of I'm like more conservative than even some of my friends when it comes to this. So I very much believe in the historicity of the Anton transcript. I know that's debatable, but the characters on that transcript, I've had some friends who have, and I've looked at them myself.
So is
They
Jerry
seem to
Grover.
be a mix. Yeah, they seem to be a mixture of Egyptian, Hebrew, and Greek. And so, at first glance, Mormon restoration critics are like, this is just a hod. This is just Bill Reel will say this. This is just a hodgepodge of stuff that Joseph Smith put together. Well,
Or
it's not.
deformed
If you know,
or deformed English, as the Tanners would put it.
yes, yes. So, but if you know anything about the development of ancient languages, and these three languages in particular, they all have a relationship together over time. Egyptian, so you have Coptic, which is influenced by Greek, but that's an Egyptian language, and Hebrew is actually influenced by Greek. So the Paleo Hebrew that you get pre 586 BCE, the Dalet symbol is actually a Greek delta. So that is not surprising. And 586 is after the time that Lehi and Nephi would historically have left Jerusalem. So it's not surprising that all these characters, Egyptian, Hebrew, and Greek, are mixed together. That's exactly what you would get during a particular time period, namely early 6th century or before. So I think, and I have a friend of mine, Brian Nettles, a shout out to him, who's actually kind of looked at the Anton transcript. David Hawking has done so as well and tried to piece together, see if you can get a translation from that. So some interesting studies have been done. So my point with all this is that it's not just chicken scratch, conglomeration, just a hodgepodge of Greek, Hebrew, and Egyptian characters. There's something going on here.
Yeah, and Jerry Grover, who's done like an excellent book on volcanism in the Book of Mormon, he's actually has a book now, and it's a second edition where he looks at the Anton transcript and tries to decipher it.
Yeah,
It's outside my area of expertise, but like it seems to be like the best analysis so far in print on the topic. But
yeah, I think that's sold at the Restoration Bookstore. I've mentioned this bookstore before in Missouri. Great book. I think that's the book you're referencing.
yeah, there's also a book, Characters Unlocked by Mary Jo Jacques.
Oh, it's characters. It is characters unlocked. It's characters unlocked.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I actually have on my bookshelf. Jerry Grover has also had his own book on the topic as well. Okay, so why is there such a debate, or furor, if you will, about 2 Nephi 5:21 in the Book of Mormon? You kind of touched upon it, but like, well, I think there's a debate about it, and then we kind of go into like your proposal as to how to interpret the passage itself.
Yeah. I think that on both ends, this has always kind of been a tricky verse. We get this in the Bible as well. You'll get verses that just cause a lot of controversy, and this is definitely the most important. This is definitely the most controversial, I think, in the Book of Mormon. So you have ex-Mormons who say, this is proof that the Restoration tradition is racist. Its central scriptures are racist, and then you have people within the Restoration who don't really know what to do with this verse. They see it, and it's problematic for them, and it doesn't need to be problematic. And one of the things that I point out in my article is that there's a long-standing tradition, which is correct in a lot of ways when you look at the Book of Mormon within its larger context, when you don't just look at 2 Nephi chapter 5, when you look at the Book of Mormon in its larger context, as viewing this blackness, this darkness, as a spiritual darkness rather than racial darkness. So we have that within the traditions themselves. I know the Bickertonites, I have a couple of them who are very good friends of mine. They always interpreted Second Nephi 5 as spiritual darkness rather than physical pigmentation. So that exists already in the tradition, but I don't think it's something that a lot of restorationists know about. So when they come to Second Nephi 5, they get shook up about it. But I think one of my concerns and one of the things that really, like I said, prompted me to write this article was to show that when you take the Book of Mormon as a Semitic text, with all translations, there's some room, and I'm very clear to say that I don't think the prophet translated anything wrong, but I think that there is a flexibility and nuance which you get in the Book of Mormon itself. In 2 Nephi 5, it's a skin of blackness, but this skin is understood as scales of blackness later on. And clearly later on, the Book of Mormon denotes spiritual blackness, spiritual darkness. I should also add here kind of, and I talk about this in the other article I write on Moses 7, that when we talk about blackness, when an ancient text talks about blackness and darkness, it's not referring to people like me. It's not referring to skin pigmentation. This is kind of, I like to say, Star Wars theology, darkness versus the light. So we get that.
So basically, the Nephites were the Jedi and the Lamanites when they were unrighteous were the Sith.
Yes, we're the Sith. Yes, I love that. I love that. So this is, and to me, this is another proof of the Book of Mormon's ancient origins. We get this in Greek mythology. We get this in the Hebrew Bible, and we even get this in the Quran. So there's this dualism between light and darkness, and I think that's what you have going on here, and it doesn't refer necessarily to skin pigmentation.
So again, like if one has the assumption, which is something we both shared, that the Book of Mormon is a translation of an ancient text, approaching it without like our modern presentist assumptions, but like trying to read like, say, an ancient Near Eastern or ancient insert wherever you believe it took place in the New World, Mesoamerica, that kind of helps when it comes to, say, the interpretation of text. Just like, say, when you approach the New Testament or the Old Testament, you don't read it like a modern. You actually read it as, like, say, an ancient Israeli or an ancient Jew influenced by Hellenism, and that's how you approach it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, that's perfect. Now, you kind of discuss, before we're going to go into, like, your Midrashic interpretation, what is Midrash in general?
Yeah, so Midrash is a form of Jewish exegesis. It becomes very popular. We have it even in the Old Testament itself, but it's a way of seeing kind of the multiple nuances, the multiple meanings of certain words and terms. So you could argue that the book of Daniel, for example, and what it does with some of the terminology in Jeremiah is a midrash or a commentary on the book of Jeremiah. But in the Middle Ages, rabbis would look at kind of the various meanings of a term. This is something I point out in my Latin classes. I always say with a translation, we can all be looking at the same text, but we'll get multiple translations because there are multiple meanings to different words and terms. And this is something that the rabbis loved, that they delighted in, looking at the various meanings of terms and really coming to interpreting things in different ways, interpreting a term and its meaning in different ways, depending on its use, its context in different places in the Hebrew Bible. So this is a very popular form of Jewish interpretation, especially in the Middle Ages. It kind of dies out in the modern era, but it was a way for people to for Jewish exegetes to kind of basically talk about the passage in a variety of different ways based on the different meanings of the terms in that passage.
So would there be like an overlap between, say, Midrash and, say, the largely medieval, say, Catholic traditions of, say, analogical meaning, allegorical meaning, the different senses or vices of Scripture, beyond the strict historical, grammatical?
Yes, exactly. So very much parallels between Jewish Midrashic exegesis in the Middle Ages and what you get with kind of origin in the with the patristic era and going into like Gregory the Great and stuff in the medieval Christian era.
Oh yeah, and once they kind of got the Son of Solomon and High Mariology, they pumped out on steroids.
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah,
So, great example of this. Speaking of the church fathers, is what they do with Song of Solomon. Song of Solomon is just a Hebrew love poem, kind of R-rated Hebrew love poem, in its original context.
yeah,
But what the church fathers do once it's translated into Greek, into Latin, they look at the way different terms are used, and they go straight up like Christological, pre-existing Christ, pre-existing Jesus, with it, which you can do depending on how you read how you understand the meaning of certain terms and phrases.
yeah. And they also went like ecclesiological, and especially in the Middle Ages onwards, Mariological.
Yeah.
For the Immaculate Conception and perpetual virginity and queenly coronation. So yeah. But for those who are wondering, myself and Spencer Marsh did an episode on the Song of Solomon a couple of weeks ago. So if you want like a very general overview of the Song of Solomon from a Latter-day Saint perspective, be sure to check out that episode. Very beautiful.
That's awesome.
Poetry.
We don't talk about it that much in the restoration. In fact, in the inspired version, it's not a part of the inspired version.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because, like, even if you don't believe it to be Theopneustos or God inspired, it's still very nice Hebrew poetry. Even if it does kind of get a little steamy at times.
Yeah. Props out. I'm gonna shameless self promotion here. There's a book I did, the Latin Scrolls, where I translate a little bit of the. I give the Latin and a translation of the Latin translation of Song of Songs.
That's good. Okay, so that's kind of like a midrash. So, like, when it comes to, say, a midrashic interpretation of the text in question, you appeal to Aramaic, particularly Daniel chapter 2, verse 35, and Ur.
Yeah.
Now, when I was reading this article for the first time a couple of weeks ago, and I've reread it for this article, podcast, I should say, kind of struck me as interesting that you would appeal to Aramaic, like loads of people would appeal to Hebrew or Egyptian. What do you think there would be a utility to appealing to Aramaic? Of course, like, it's a Northwest Semitic language like Hebrew, but Daniel, for instance, it's after the time of Lehi, so is Ezra and Nehemiah, where, like, Aramaic appears in the text in various portions. So why do you think there would be a utility to look at Aramaic, not just simply Hebrew, to, like, understand the semantic domain and language, if you will, of the Nephi at all when it comes to the Book of Mormon?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's something I raised in my article as well. So, Aramaic, yeah. So biblical Aramaic would come as we have it, Daniel, Esther, way after the time of Lehi and Nephi. But a lot of the terms that you get in biblical Aramaic, even though they're later, the meanings that they have are basically informed by the development of the Hebrew language over time. So, and Aramaic itself is a Semitic language, so it's going to have a lot of, and we use this term in biblical studies, Hebraisms in that type of Aramaic. So even though a term may be used late, it reflects a development, especially when you have a term like or which comes from or, it's going to kind of reflect the different types of meanings of that term over time and how that term has been understood over time. So even in a late text such as Daniel, that can inform us about how people, even back in Lehi's time, might have understood a similar term, a related term, or.
So basically, like, even if Aramaic may not necessarily influence Lehi at all, showing that the actives, do apologize for the non-linguistic types here, but
no problem.
The active semantic domain of the term as it's used in Daniel could reflect
the
active
back,
Hebrew
much
semantic
earlier,
domain of Lehi's time.
Yes.
I do apologize for the non-linguistic types here. So
no,
just carry on.
You explained it really well. Yeah. We get this all the time. So we even get this kind of a backwards way in Song of Songs and Ecclesiastes. So we'll have Persian loanwords that were originally in Aramaic that get translated to Hebrew. So that kind of informs us so even though these are Hebrew terms, it kind of informs us as to what later Persian Aramaic terms might have meant. So it goes both ways.
No, that's good, because, like, before I kind of went through the articles, like, Aramaic, interesting, but, like, once you kind of explained it, I'm sure, like, others though will be wondering, but Aramic's later. But no, that's perfect.
Yeah.
So you discussed, like, the Hebrew,
and I should also mention sorry.
Go ahead.
We have traces of early Aramaic in the Book of Mormon itself, of what appears to be Aramaic, or something similar to it. So this all goes back to the question of whether what you consider to be the Reformed Egyptian. So is it explicitly Hebrew, Egyptian, and Greek? Like I said, I'm pretty conservative, so I kind of take the opinion that it is, but there could be other things going on there. And a lot of the names in the Book of Mormon, I mentioned this in my article, they have that Kamat's noon ending there, an, which is basically biblical Aramaic, and much different than what you get with later Aramaic, such as a Syriac, which doesn't contain that. So there's some interesting stuff going on there. So there are some Aramaic features of whatever Nephi's there are Aramaic. What am I trying to say? Excuse me. Whatever Nephi's language is, it's possible that it contains some Aramaic features, and we see this in the languages, in the names that are given to people later on after Nephi in the Book of Mormon.
Oh, that's perfect. So you could discuss, like, initially, like, say, the semantic domain of, like, Hebrew or, and then you compare and contrast that with Aramaic So, what's the takeaway from, like, say, just looking at the Hebrew Bible and its use of or, and the utility, if you will, and looking at perhaps, like, the evidence from Aramaic or from Daniel 2:35?
Yeah, so even with Hebrew or, and I mentioned this, it's not necessarily, it doesn't really have to do with skin color. It's just whatever is holding your body together. So a lot of times, or is used to refer to wine flask, because wine flasks are made from animal skin. So it's not necessarily it's not necessarily used in the context of an ethnic group. It's just a part of the body, or some type of material that's holding things together. There's somewhat of a semantic range for understanding or as well. But in my article, I argued that the Aramaic is this is an example of this semantic range of or, where we don't necessarily need to see it as skins at all, but it can just be a temporary covering rather than a permanent one. And to go further on that, if it's a temporary covering, then it's probably not referring to ethnic skin pigmentation, which is permanent, but to something else. And so this brings me in, tying this into other passages of the Book of Mormon where it talks about the spiritual darkness, the spiritual blackness of the Nephites, and how this is removed eventually.
Okay, so
of the Lamanites, excuse me.
Oh no, that's fine. So maybe, like, if you were to discuss, like, say, maybe Daniel 2:35, the Aramaic, and, like, how that can be transposed, if you will, to, like, the Book of Mormon.
Yeah. So in Daniel, the term or, meaning shaft, is something that is temporary. It refers to the kingdoms. It's used in the context of the kingdoms of the world. These prideful Gentile nations that have basically come to power and that have oppressed the nation of Israel. And God promises that these will be as chaff, and they will fall like chaff from the field. So there's an agricultural context here as well, which I haven't done a very good job of pointing out. So the chaff here is particularly referring to the husk that you get on corn or on crops that eventually falls off when it's time for the crop to be harvested. So the context here, and this ties in, Jesus uses this terminology a lot. The context here is that you have or, that is this shaft or this covering that when the time is right, when the time is appropriate, will eventually fall off, and what is true, what is righteous, what is perfect, namely God's kingdom, will be left standing. So God's kingdom is the crop, and the chaff or the husk are these other nations which are impermanent. And to tie that into the Book of Mormon, one of the arguments I make, because and I mentioned this with some of the fundamentalist groups going the opposite way, saying that skin pigmentation black skin, is permanent. It's like a permanent curse from God. Going kind of the other way, what I argue is that if we look at the semantic range, we look at the semantic range of ayin, vav, resh, the root that makes up or in Hebrew and in Aramaic, we'll see that doesn't necessarily refer to a permanent thing, but it can refer oftentimes to something that is temporary. So,
by the way, before you
shaft fault.
continue, just so you know, I'm actually sharing the Theological Dictionary of the Old Testament for those who want to look at the semantic domain. Because unfortunately, if you kind of look at some lexicons, even Halot, they don't really do a good job when it comes to this particular Aramaic term. So,
No.
yeah.
Brown Driver's Brig, like you said, only has one entry, and
Yeah.
so
So
does
fortunately, this has
Halot.
3 paragraphs, and this is the best one I have in the scholarly Hebrew and Aramaic lexicons I have. So I thought I'd
Yeah.
just share it for a while so others can go through the semantic domain and see how it's used.
And you'll notice
Yeah.
on what Robert put up, what she put up, it has shaft and threshing floor. So there's an agricultural context. Whatever on the threshing floor is not permanent. So whatever this curse, so in the larger context, going back to the Book of Mormon, whatever this curse is from God, this is not permanent. This is something that's going to fall off, and people will, whoever has been cursed, they will return back to God. They will repent. They'll turn back to God, and this will be lifted. So the curse falls off. It's something that's temporary. And in the larger context, like I said, the Book of Mormon, this seems to refer to spiritual darkness being removed very clearly when the Lamanites repent and turn to God. Their spiritual eyes are opened, and they're able to enter into a relationship with God.
Yeah, and it kind of makes sense, especially like in light of other historical narratives in the Book of Mormon. Like one that comes to mind is Alma 55, where there's a search of the people, the Lamanites, where they have to find someone who's a Lamanite or a descendant of a Lamanite. And it's always struck me as like that would be so simple if there's like one black guy and a pool of white guys. Not to be crude about it, but like
exactly.
Yeah, but if it's more like Lamanite identity was not necessarily use the technical term like phenotypical or like physical appearances. There might be like cultural or accent, linguistic details, but not necessarily like external skin type, because that narrative does not really make sense in light of the
it doesn't work if it's pigmentation. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
So
and there's like exegetical explanatory power when one takes the Book of Mormon as a whole, if you will.
Yeah, and I think that I think you raised a great point that we have such a problem, I think, in the Restoration with 2 Nephi 5, because at the end of the day, Robert, we're bad exegetes. We don't look at the Book of Mormon as a whole. We look at a particular verse and we're like, oh my goodness, there's this verse. But there's a larger, with everything in the Book of Mormon, not just the Book of Mormon, but all of Scripture, the Bible, etc. There's a larger context that is at play. And if you don't understand that larger context, if you don't situate verses within their larger context, it can be problematic.
I completely agree. It's one of the reasons why I started blogging, because as with you, and this is one of the reasons I actually like you, there's the importance of, like, say, knowing how to engage in exegesis and take the text seriously, and hopefully, like, I'm kind of imbibing that kind of, historical grammatical bug, if you will, to other people. But when it comes to the Book of Mormon, like, even if you think it's like a 19th century text, you still have to take the whole ball of wax as a whole. It's just part of proper exegesis and interpretation of the text. Even if you don't think it's inspired, even if you think it's like pseudepigraphical or what have you. Like if the two of us were to do like a nerdy discussion sometime, and I'd be up for, like, say, the Apocalypse of Abraham or 1 Enoch, you take it as a whole.
So exactly. So with Enoch, you have to take it as a whole, because it's so. If you take one piece, you take one chapter, you're gonna be very confused. But if you look at it as a whole, it starts to make much more sense.
Yeah, even if it's a bit of a crazy text, it does make more sense once you look at it as a whole. Yeah. So that kind of goes into like your approach to it. Of course, like before your article and since your article, there's been like some works on the issue of skins and the Book of Mormon and the question of racism. So like there's Ethan Sproat's article, which I quite like. There's a few others as well by Steenbeck. So what's your general assessment of like some of the other recent articles just before yours and after yours, and is there anyone that you think like would work very well or could like with some nuancing?
I love Sproat's idea of the skins being the garments that the Lamanites wore. And I think that ties in well to this. Now, I argue that the shaft or the husk is a spiritual is a spiritual thing. But I think that Sproat kind of hits the nail on the head that whatever this skin quote unquote is, it's not physical. It's not physical pigmentation. Like you said, there are other stories in the Book of Mormon where if we're going by physical pigmentation, it just doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. But I think that back to the story that you mentioned, if we go by Sproat's view that these are skins they wore as clothing. This is like animal skin that they identified that, it's different types of coats that identify the Lamanites versus Nephites, then I think that works really, really well. So I really like Sproat's view there. It's slightly different than mine. But again, I think in both of ours, this is a temporary thing. We're not talking about skin pigmentation that you have your entire life, but this is a temporary thing, whether it's a spiritual husk or a jacket that you're wearing that you can take off, that you can remove. It's not permanent.
Yeah, and like at least from my perspective, it seems like there could actually work both together. Like you could use like the symbolism to refer to like some kind of physical,
Yes.
but not so phenotypical like
Yeah.
pigmentation. Either they were putting like say makeup or some kind of
Hmm.
Mesoamerican or Heartlander. I'm
Yeah.
not going to go into that. The blackface of sorts, that Steen
Yeah.
Blackness has argued, or like some kind of physical garment. So I think they actually could work together. There would be some nuancing, but I don't think they're necessarily
Yeah.
mutually exclusive. I think they
When the
could work
spiritual
together.
blindness is removed, the guys remove off their coats,
Yeah,
because
so
they
it's
don't know.
both and
They're not
either or
identified
when
as
it comes to
that's
physical and
that's the marker
spiritual.
of being identified as a Lamanite. Just like you wear red for if you want to be a gang member of the Bloods or something like that. That's your marker of being a Lamanite. So you remove that when your eyes have been opened to Christ.
Yeah, so like there could be like a physical external topic, like whether like some kind of makeup, like one of the recent articles in the Interpreter, and or a garment like that of a false priesthood or what have you, as well as like the spiritual. It could be either. It could be not either or, but both and, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we're not Protestants. We have both and. Like we have baptism and faith. Not either one or the other, and so
Yeah.
forth. So
Yeah. Which I love about the Restoration. Yes.
yes. Okay. Well,
You don't have to choose one.
anything else you want to say about the this particular article before we're going to move on to Moses 7?
Yeah, this was my first. Actually, no, I had written a review of Grant Hardy's introduction to the Book of Mormon in 2016. But this was one of the first. I actually think I finished this article before I did the Grant Hardy review. So this was my very first foray into restoration studies. So I think pretty fondly of this article. I would change some of, speaking of grammar and syntax. There's some places where it reads kind of choppy, so I would change that. But this was right after my PhD kind of fell through. I just started being a Latin teacher, and I didn't think I would ever write anything academic again. I met some really cool people at the Maxwell Institute, Joseph Spencer, and et cetera. And I started writing this article. So this goes way back. This is, I know it was published in 2018, but I written it back like 2015, 2016.
That's
So,
nice. And how has
yeah.
it been received? Do you think?
I think it's been received very well. And people cite it all the time. I'm actually really surprised how often they get cited. I think it's on Book of Mormon Central, Pearl of Great Price Central. People, I get emails all the time of people that refer to it and say, this was a really important article. What has been most touching to me, I often get it from people within the faith who say this made me re-examine, 2nd Nephi 5 when I was having kind of this faith crisis. And so that makes me, I don't want to say proud, but I feel very blessed when people say that, because I think that there is so much out there that's always trying to attack the Book of Mormon, criticize the Book of Mormon. So I felt really honored to do something that, helped strengthen people's faith.
Yeah, because like in the opening page or two of your article, you kind of have in the notes a survey of some of the typical criticisms of the Book of Mormon, that it's racist, including like the works of the Tanners, Leighton Colvin Scott, but also the very inane South Park.
And I think I think one of the problems, not to toot my own horn here, because I didn't get my PhD, but one of the problems is that I think past approaches. One of the things I think makes this approach unique, not to sound too prideful here, is that you have it coming from a Semitic context with somebody who has a background in Semitic languages, specifically Hebrew, and also biblical languages, Greek as well. So I think that that's a pushback that Sandra Tanner and Bill Reel really can't respond to. Of course, they just say, there's no Joseph Smith just made it up. But I think that there's no evidence for that. And if you look at the Book of Mormon, if you truly look at the Book of Mormon, especially get an 1830 edition, get a reprint of the 1830 edition, and go through it. It's not just Joseph Smith quoting the King James Version. There's some really interesting stuff going on.
But of course, the response will be, "But have you read the CES letter?"
Yes, I have. I thought it was bunk.
Yeah, so true. But just on the side, like you've probably seen the article where like they kind of show like their horse bones contemporary with the Book of Mormon now and stuff like that. I kind of been joking with a few of my friends. Well, the response will be, "Well, they're not Nephite horses, and have you read the CS letter, man?" So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. That's recent stuff on the horses. Yes.
Yeah. It does seem pretty solid. Regardless of where you locate the Book of Mormon, it does kind of show like this criticism is now bunk, But of course the goalposts will be shifted again. We all know.
It always is. Yeah. So,
okay.
People will believe what they want to believe, or not believe what they want to not believe.
Yeah, it's like 10 plates and all that jazz. I mean, like some of the nationalistic explanations are just bogus.
Yeah.
But
I love the metallurgy. I love how Joseph Smith, I'm going off a little bit off tangent with the apologetic stuff.
Oh, go ahead.
But Joseph Smith knew every book in first off, the Palmyra Library had every single ancient translation of an ancient text. The Book of Enoch, which was not published yet, by the way, in 1830, not an American edition. There was an English edition, but not an American edition. But Palmyra Library had every single book. Joseph Smith read every single book in the Palmyra Library, and Joseph Smith was this master metallurgist who created these plates, and was willing to be chased around and hunted and have his house broken into to hide these plates that he invented. But that's my rant.
Well, of course, we have to believe that as opposed to like an angel in a place, because that's absurd. But Chef Lindsay actually has a very good page. It's humor, like one day in the life of Joseph Smith, translator extraordinaire, and they kind of have this kind of mock script where like they're debating like to include like 2 or 3 phrases from the Apocrypha and stuff like that. It's pretty funny. But
I'll have to see that. You have to send it to me.
Yeah, I'll send it to you after this. It's actually very funny. He also has like one was the Book of Mormon plagiarized from Walt Whitman's 1855 Leaves of Grass. I'll send.
I want to see that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll just make Leaves of Grass one day. Yeah. Okay, so I'll definitely send that to you, and I'm sure you'll probably die of laughter. But we'll move on to your article that was published by the Interpreter. The people of Canaan, a new reading of Moses 7. Now, before we're going to go into like the article itself, and so forth, of course, like you used to belong to the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and now you're a member of one of the Elijah Message churches. Now, looking at Wikipedia, and I know this is not correct, but like looking at Wikipedia when it comes to say the entry for the Assured Way of the Lord, it simply says that the group rejects the Doctrine and Covenants and Prograde Price, and there's no nuancing. Now, what is your particular denomination's approach to the Prograde Price? Because I think it's much more nuanced than simply
it's much more nuanced. Like I said last time I was on the podcast, we technically officially don't accept the Doctrine and Covenants, but there's a lot of Doctrine and Covenants that we do accept, and in fact it's cited in our church literature. So Doctrine and Covenants 84 with the Temple in Missouri, which is very important to us, is cited in our church literature. Same thing with the inspired version. So a lot of us, as I mentioned last time I was on the podcast, come from the Reorganized Church. I came from the Community of Christ. So the inspired version was our scripture. And so not only for the Elijah Message Church, but for the Temple Lot, unofficially, and the Temple Lot people will admit this, a lot of their members read the inspired version. Last year, when I was at the church headquarters in Independence, Missouri, in our church library, we had multiple copies of the Pearl of Great Price, and we had multiple copies of the inspired version. So even though we come from that kind of Granville Hendricks tradition with the Book of Commandments and the Book of Mormon, and that's it, we also have, like I said, a very strong influence of the reorganization, for which the inspired version, which contains Moses chapters 1 through 8, was a sacred text. So that remains a sacred text and devotional text for many of us. And I mentioned that in the article itself. Yeah.
Yeah, I just thought I'd ask. So, like, maybe to use, like, say, some terminology that is used in some other traditions. Would it be like similar to, say, deuterocanonical or anti-leguminous status? Like, you may not necessarily like use it
Yeah.
on the same level as, say, I think your video gone. You may not be able to use it as on the same level as, say, the Book of Mormon or the Record of Nephites, but at the same time, it can still be used maybe to buttress doctrines, but it, not necessarily like to
Yes.
formulate doctrines, if you will, like that kind of deuterocanonical or canon within the canon kind of status.
Yes. I think, so Jerome, for Saint Jerome, I think that's a really good example. He believed that the books of the Bible written in Hebrew had higher status than the books of the Bible that were written in Greek. He called them deuterocanonical. And he says that they were for personal study and personal revelation and personal insights. And I think that would exactly that would be a very good model for how we look at the inspired version. So we read it personally. For me, it's scripture. But when we formulate doctrine, when we talk about the articles of faith, and when we talk about doctrinal issues, for my tradition, that comes from the Record of the Nephites, aka Book of Mormon, the Book of Commandments, and the Word of the Lord.
Okay, that's good. So, you kind of discussed like why you wrote the article in 2 Nephi 5. Was there anything that kind of moved you to actually write this particular article in Moses 7?
Yes, Moses 7, Robert, I'm just going to admit this, is probably my favorite passage in the entire Restoration Scriptures. It was one of, so I read the Book of Mormon, and then when I first got exposed to the Restoration, then I remember going to this used bookstore in Frederick, Maryland, where I got the triple combination. And one of the very first things I read after reading the Book of Mormon was, shocker, the Pearl of Great Price. So I loved kind of its alternate version of Genesis. And I think at the time of my life, I was looking for kind of something that was alternative to the traditional way I read the Bible. So Pearl of Great Price kind of stepped in there and kind of provided that alternate Genesis story for me. And it was really moving. I was very moved by the idea of Zion, of a place where there was no poor, where there was no inequality, where there was perfect peace. And so that's something that's just resonated with me throughout the years. So Moses 7 is my all-time favorite chapter, my all-time favorite scripture within the entire Restoration. And I usually read the Pearl of Great Price because it's so super long. I usually read it about at least 2 or 3 times a year, maybe 4 times. I'll just go through it. So this was something that was very special to me. At the same time, just as with 2 Nephi 5, there's often criticism raised against it for these statements about the people of Canaan. So there's a YouTube video one time where this black guy went to a Mormon meeting house and they were reading Moses 7, and the dude just went on this rant about how the Restoration was racist because of this passage. But not just that, there's a large history of interpretation of this passage in conjunction with the Book of Abraham, which has been kind of interpreted in a racialist manner. And I wanted to kind of do an in-depth examination of the text and really see if that racialism is there. And what I spent, at least like a year and a half just looking, before I wrote anything down, just looking at the Moses 7 text, and I found some interesting things, which is that the people of Canaan, they get this blackness that comes upon them, but they're not actually mentioned. There's never mentioned a curse that comes upon them. That curse comes upon the residue of the people who are explicitly mentioned as not being the people of Canaan. So I was wondering what was up with that. Is there anything in the text that suggests why this residue of the people is cursed and not the people of Canaan, and why Enoch does not preach to them? And so this led me kind of down a rabbit hole into finally writing this article where I argue that that Enoch could not preach to the people of Canaan because of the racial prejudice of the time of the other children of Adam against the people of Canaan for their black skin. And this is something that God condemns. And God also judges the residue of the people more harshly because they are granted they are granted access to Enoch's preaching, but they reject Enoch's message anyway. So they're judged, even though they're not black, they're judged harder, they're judged more harshly than the people of Canaan.
Okay, and we'll delve a bit more into this, but maybe take the step back. Of course, this is part of like the inspired version of the JST, so maybe I should ask, how do you actually view the JST? And what I mean by that is like there's like different strands of like what the JST is. Like some
Great
have
question.
the idea that it's like a textual restoration, albeit in English. Some view it like say very Midrashic. You know, there's like
Yeah.
Robert J. Matthews, who's now deceased, as well. Ken P. Jackson. Like it's a mix of things. Like some of it could be like a restoration of text. Some of it could be a restoration of things that were never inscripted, so like maybe genuine oral traditions.
Yeah,
Some like say Joseph
that's a really
interacting
important
with the
question.
text. So like how do you yourself view the JST or
Yes.
the inspired version?
In the same issue of the Interpretive Journal, there's an article right after mine. Right after mine, that has an early Christian context for the Book of Moses by David Calabro,
Great
who
article.
argues that this was basically an ancient Christian text that Joseph Smith, through divine inspiration, somehow got access to. I go a little further than that. I think that, and as a biblical scholar, you see evidence of this all the time. I'll just put it out there. I think that our Masoretic text of the Hebrew Bible is corrupted. There are multiple errors. There are multiple problems in this. Biblical scholars acknowledge that left and right. They even acknowledge that the Septuagint in some places preserves textual traditions that are absent in our Hebrew text. It's corrupt. You don't need Joseph. You don't need the Book of Mormon to say that things have been taken at plain and precious truths have been taken out of the Bible. If you're a biblical scholar and know anything about reception history, source criticism, text criticism, you know it's corrupt.
Yeah,
it's
and the Masoretes would often
had.
fudge the vol pointing even just to like make sure the Christians do not have proof text for the Messiah being pre-existent, like Psalm 110 verse 3. Like the Septuagint
Exactly
understands the vocalization as Yelidatika, I have begotten you. Well, you know, the Masoretes kind of changed the vol pointing to represent Edith Heka, you know, your ute, which doesn't really make much sense. And you know,
exactly. Yeah, one of the things that used to bother me. So I did a Septuagint class, and people used to. I'd say to the professor, "Well, if the Septuagint has a reading that the tree, the hanging from the tree, if they have that, and it's in the earliest manuscripts, then why are we going with the Hebrew?" And they never had a very good example. They never had a good answer for that.
except maybe for the naive. Well, it was originally written in Hebrew, so like the Masoretic text, which is also Hebrew, which is very naive, you know.
Yeah. They never had a good answer to that. But I'm of the opinion the text of the Old Testament that we have is corrupt. Joseph Smith, through revelation, gained insight into a text, into a manuscript, into a text tradition that is more accurate, that is the most accurate, in my opinion. I'm very much McConkie here. That is the most accurate Old Testament text that we got. Now, did he get this through divine revelation? Yes. Now, how does that come? Did God just transmit this knowledge to him, or did he have access to some type of place or text? Remember that Nephi takes in the Book of Mormon. He has the books that he gets from Laban. He chops off Laban's head. He gets the books, and they have they have the story of Adam and Eve through Moses, through the reign of Zedekiah. And that is unaltered. That is unaltered. That doesn't have the corruptions that our current translations of the Old Testament, that our current Hebrew text have of the Old Testament. And I think Joseph Smith's getting from there. So I think, long story short, Robert, not to confuse too many people, there is some type of text. I believe there's some type of actual text that Joseph Smith is getting access to. Now, do you see it through the eyes of faith, or do you actually have the text next to him? I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that. One other thing I'd like to mention is that our Masoretic text that everybody thinks is so great is really late. That dates. It's a medieval text to the 10th century CE. It's not even that early. If you want, I mean, you can make a better argument for the Dead Sea Scrolls, and even there, clearly there have been a lot of plain and precious things taken out of those manuscripts.
Yeah, like the LXX.
And
Not the LXX itself, but like the OR text for the LXX was very anti-anthropomorphic, and there were like a lot of corruptions on that point as well. So
yeah. Yeah,
So you don't
exactly.
believe? So you don't believe the JST came from Adam Clark?
No, so I was talking to one of my friends, Ben Schaefer. He's a fundamentalist Mormon, one of a friend, good friend of mine. Every, and this is going to go into a place where John Dalen and what he does. He'll take stuff that restorationists have talked about 20 years ago. Every single person who has ever done any work on the JST, Thomas Wayman, etc. Everybody knows that Joseph Smith read and used the Adam Clark commentary, as any good Bible scholar would have in the 19th century, as he was working on the Joseph Smith translation. But there have been studies done which really show, and Jeff Lindsay talks about this as well, that the Joseph Smith translation really doesn't have dependence on Adam Clark. But yes, did Joseph Smith probably have a copy of Adam Clark sitting next to him as he did the translation? Yes, but he's not using it. It's just Joseph Smith is a biblical scholar. He's a darn good biblical scholar, and your best biblical scholars back in the 19th century would have had Adam Clark sitting next to him. So it's not as controversial as John Dellen makes it out to be.
Oh yeah. I was just joking because you reference like Wayman, but like I think Ken P. Jackson for the most part did a very good job in his Interpreter article on that. Now, funny enough, like him, he and others, myself included, would have no problem if Joseph did use the Adam Clark translation, because especially Sidney Rigdon, who was like more biblically literate than Joseph at that time, it would be like say what the Anchor Yale Bible commentary would be to us modern nerds. It would be the go-to source. But I think Ken P. Jackson has shown like Thomas Wayman's was a bit over-enthusiastic in trying to find parallels at times. I think like a better way would be like looking at Sidney Rigdon and what would have been imparted from Sidney through osmosis to Joseph Smith. I think that would be a better way to approach. Some.
And I think Joseph Smith's own personal stamp is on the JST. But I absolutely think that he is looking at an Old Testament. There's a lot of features in the JST, not just Moses 1-8, which suggests that. If you go to the New Testament in the JST, there are a lot of little small things that Joseph Smith corrects that conform to better Greek manuscripts, to more accurate Greek manuscripts versus what gets later translated in the King James. I love the King James, but it's interesting if you do. And this is something I want to write an article about one day. But if you look at some of the corrections and changes that Joseph Smith makes, they reflect the earliest Greek manuscripts of the New Testament over and above what becomes a tradition later, and that's more commonly accepted, especially in the English translations and the German translations of Luther and stuff, etc.
Yeah, I know, like some LDS have appealed to James 2:19 in the JST and how it reflects some of the grammar of the Greek with respect to the fate of demons and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that would be interesting. So whenever like many LDS or others, when the broad restorationist tradition read Canaan, they immediately think Cain, Cain. So is there actually a relationship linguistically, culturally between Cain and Canaanite, or you kind of briefly touch upon this in the article. So like if you want to like run with that first.
Yeah, no linguistic relation. So the term for Cain is Kayin, Kof, Noon, Yod, Noon, and the term for Canaan is Kaf, Aleph. Let me see, Kaf, Aleph, Noon, Noon. So they're actually completely different. What you have different textual traditions of the JST, Old Testament Manuscript 1, Old Testament Manuscript 2, the times and seasons. Wayman talks about these a lot in his book. Ken Jackson talks about these a lot in his book as well. And so in some variants, you'll have Cain, and in some variants, you'll have Canaan. But the original Old Testament Manuscript 1, which I believe is the most accurate, and the earliest of the Joseph Smith translation, has Canaan. Don't quote me on that, though, but I believe so. But you have different traditions where it's Cain and Canaan. So President Joseph Fielding Smith, for example, he's using the tradition where it says Cain, and that's where he makes the association between Black people and Cain, and that. So it's interesting.
Yeah, and in the article you kind of discussed, like, say, the ancient concept of racism, how it wasn't, and we kind of briefly touched upon this earlier, like, it wasn't exactly like people that one skin type hating the others. It's usually like people from one culture group not liking another culture group, even if they look the same. You kind of
Yes,
mentioned, like,
yes.
say, the life of Saint Anthony by Athanasius. So, like, you know, how would ancient people have? Of course, there was, like, say, discrimination, ethnocentrism. You know, so, like, what was racism, if you will, in, say, like, the ancient world? How did that look like?
Racism was a couple things. So it was not what it is now, where you believe someone is inferior because of the color of their skin, regardless black, white, whatever. Um, it was basically that you so there wasn't, how can I put it? There wasn't a there wasn't a skin element attached to it. Namely, so people could look the same, but if you were, so for example, a Spartan may have thought that they were better than an Athenian. So there were superior peoples and superior civilizations over and above each other, but there was no like racial element. There wasn't like a racial element to it as we understand today. I don't know if I'm explaining that very well.
Oh yeah, no.
Um,
Basically, like, there would be, like, say, discrimination, but not because, like, say, you know, I'm one certain skin color and you're a certain skin color. It's more
exactly,
like you come
exactly.
from a
It was more
different culture or
cultural.
geographical
It
locale.
was cultural, geographical, and yeah, cultural and geographical. So the Persians and the Greeks hate each other, even though back in the day they most likely looked the same, but different cultures. So the Persian culture was different than the Greek culture, and it was based on that. And the Persians were geographically separate from the Greek culture. So it was based on those that you had inferiority and superiority, but not based on skin color. Now, it's interesting that by the Greco Roman period, you do get, and I mentioned this earlier in our conversation, this dualism between light and darkness. And that kind of translates into skin color. So in St. Anthony, the devil's depicted as a black man, but it's not because black people are it's not because black people are inferior or anything, but because black skin is equated with darkness, which is equated with the dark elements, with evil. So you kind of get it's somewhat similar to modern racism, but not really. There's my professor in college always used to say it's a dualism. So black people are affected by black people in the ancient world were affected by that dualism in the sense that their dark skin was equated with the element of darkness and what that meant on a dualistic scale, light versus darkness.
Okay,
So
so it
this
wasn't, like,
also
say,
worked.
a dislike of black people because we were black. It's just like you were unfortunate, like the color black was associated with evil, and there was this kind of
Yes,
whole
yes, it wasn't animosity
yeah.
just because of someone's race. And I'd like to mention this went actually both ways. So you have in a lot of Roman cults, there's pictures of this. There's a book Before Color Prejudice by, is it Frank Snowden? But there are pictures of black priests officiating around a bunch of white guys in these Greek mystery cults. And the reason for that is because the black skin is associated with darkness, with what's mysterious, and you need both the light and the dark to understand the ancient mysteries and to really understand the nature of the cosmos in these mystery cults. So that worked both ways. It wasn't always negative.
On the article on page 172, you actually note that Moses 7 presents a dualistic connection between skin color and good evil, similar to what we find in other ancient texts. The blackness that comes upon the children of Cain as an after effect of the Lord cursing the earth seems to be interpreted by the other groups mentioned in the text as a negative attribute and something worthy of ridicule. And then you kind of go into, like, say, the discussion about, like, what is the blackness and what is the curse and what's the discrimination is against him or what have you. So I think that may be a good jumping off point. It's like, how do you yourself, you know, in the article interpret, like, say, the cursing and the blackness? You know, is this evidence that the text is racist against dark colored people, or is there something going on beyond this kind of very superficial reading of the text, as popular as it is?
Yeah, yeah. I think that um, I think that it's a really good question. We have in Greek mythology the story of how black people are created in Greek mythology. It's kind of funny, but it's rather it's let's just say outdated at the same time. So the Python, I believe, comes crashing from the sky. He's driving his dad's chariot, and he goes so fast that he sets Africa on fire, and the people, therefore, in Africa have this burnt black skin. And I think that going back to kind of the history, Moses 7 as part of an ancient text, you have something similar going on here. God curses the land. So the land is cursed with what? Much heat, as it says. So you have the heat. The heat causes the blackness to come upon the people of Canaan. But this is interpreted going to this kind of ancient kind of dualism as a curse, as something evil, and the rest of the children of Adam stay away from the sons of Canaan, which God rebukes them for later on, saying that these people have no affection for each other, for they hate their own blood. So they hate these Canaanites, even though they are part of the sons of Adam as well.
Well, when you mentioned the co-libertarian, it's like, at least it's not as crazy as modern gender theory, but I don't want to get cancelled. But so is the blackness actually the curse, or is it just like a result of a curse?
It's a result of the land being cursed. So the blackness isn't a curse; it's a result. The land is cursed, and we get this throughout the book of Moses. So when God gets angry, God curses the land. In the Noah story in the Bible, God curses the land because of corruption, because of violence. The Canaanites, remember, they're fighting the people of Shum, so there seems to be a little violence there. But the blackness is not the curse. The blackness is a result of the land being cursed with much heat, and the heat produces the blackness.
Yeah, and this kind of goes back to what we were discussing when it comes to the 2 Nephi 5 article, the importance of like reading texts in their context and reading them carefully, because loads of people think the blackness,
it's the curse.
However you want to define it, is the curse. But no, it's
that's
incidental.
The
land was cursed, and incidentally, as a result,
that
happened. So,
the land is defiled because of the violence of the Canaanites and the Shumites. So they're fighting. So God curses the land, and that's what results in the blackness.
Yeah, but maybe like someone would say, well, that sounds all good and fine, but like, what about the fact that the gospel was not preached to them? Isn't this like an example, like, say, God as a divine curse withholding the gospel from them, to make sure that they don't get blessings because of this curse they have? How would and of course I know your article deals with that, but like, how would you respond to that, exegetically?
Yeah. I think so. It says afterwards that so blackness fell upon the children of Canaan so that they were despised by all of the people. And I think that, we need to look at how serious that despising was. I think the text alludes to this really strong hatred against the people of Canaan on the part of these other sons of Adam. And and I think this hatred is so great that it interferes with Enoch's message. Now, one of the criticism I got in the article is that someone said one time, well, Enoch, as God's prophet, he would not be afraid of anything. And I conceded at that point. I would, if I could change the article, I would say I would not use the word fear in connection to Enoch. So I don't think Enoch's afraid to preach to these black people, or else he'll get in trouble with the sons of Adam. But I do think that, and I've said this before to other people, that God doesn't affect our free will. So if people have prejudices of whatever kind, God's not just going to sweep in there and take that away.
Yeah, we're not Calvinists.
Yeah. So God works within the context of what people's views are and stuff at the time. And I think that one of the arguments I make in my article is that the text suggests that the animosity towards the people of Canaan was so great that it would have hindered Enoch's ministry to the other nations if he had tried to preach to them. And we see this dynamic in early Mormonism. We see it even in the reorganization. So I mentioned the Community of Christ Doctrine and Covenants, where you have during the Civil War, there's a revelation that says, don't be too hasty to ordain black ex-free slaves to the priesthood, because the cultural context is Reconstruction. The cultural context is really bad. The social context is really bad. There's a lot of animosity towards freemen at the time. People think that they caused the war and everything. So don't be cautious about that. And I think the exact same thing is going on here in Enoch's time.
Yeah, and of course the text you referenced there will be or LDS section 116 of their Doctrine and Covenants. You actually have a few pages discussing that revelation of Joseph Smith III. But like someone would say, well, land and people, they could be used interchangeably, like it's a linguistic style here. But like I like the fact you're cognizant of this, like on footnote 26. And by the way, footnotes all the way in notes that's heresy. But on footnote 26, it can be argued that the land in this passage is to be understood as a reference to the people who inhabit it. If this reading is accepted, then it would indeed indicate that the people of Canaan themselves are cursed. Against this view, it is important to note that the prophet makes very clear distinctions between curses directed toward the land and those directed toward particular people or groups of people, even in the book of Moses, like Moses 5:52 and 5:56. So while there's a possibility one could argue land is just used as a literary device for not just the land but the inhabitants of it. However, with respect to the context of the book of Moses, there is a distinction between the land and the people who inhabit the land.
Yeah. Which is very, very important to note, and I think explains what's going on here. So again, God, so the land has become corrupted through violence. We get the same thing in the Noah story. So the land is cursed, but that has an effect on the people of the land, a physical effect on the people of the land, namely this blackness that comes upon them.
But that's not the cursing. That's only like.
But that is not the curse itself. Yes. Yeah.
No, that's fine. I think that's a very good overview of the article. Any other thing you wanted to touch upon on that article? Like, how has this one been received? Was there anything you wanted to include in this article, or even the other article that unfortunately got the cut from the editors just for like space or what have you?
Yeah, no. I was very proud of this article. This was the first time a couple days back when I knew we were going to interview. I was able to look at this and the second Nephi 5 article. I actually like this one a lot, but I love them both. But I actually I'm very proud of this one. I think it addressed something because we talk about a lot's been written on Moses 7, but we always shy away from especially in modern restoration literature, we always shy away from the people of Canaan. So I wanted to address that head on. So I think it's something that brought something to light that may have been uncomfortable, but in a way that really explained it in a way that makes people see the text even in a better light.
Yeah, I'm just going to share something like my friend Matthew Bone co-authored an article, and Matthew, I'm sure if you follow his work, he's done excellent work in the linguistic features of the Book of Mormon, not just like the names, but like the word plays on the names. He actually wrote a book. I'm just going to pop it up here. This is the problem of doing it live. Here we go. This is from the book he co-authored with an Aaron P. Shad, the Book of Moses from Ancient of Days to the Latter Days, that was published just last year by BYU Religious Studies and Deseret. On pages 292 to 293, they address the blackness of the children of Canaan. And I'm not going to go through all of it. It's actually on my blog. I reproduced it. But they even showed like how even in 19th century LDS terminology, black was often used symbolically and so forth. You know, might tie in nicely with 2 Nephi 5, like Eliza Orr Snow, Missouri, what tells thee, O Missouri, that thy face should gather blackness, and why are your features so terribly distorted? And they kind of go through like examples where black or blackness is used in a non-literal sense, if you will. Yeah. And they argue this type of language and interpretation associating blackness with wickedness is also found in the Bible commentaries of Joseph Stay. It is possible that references to blackness in the Book of Moses and perhaps 2 Nephi 5 are to be viewed in the same vein as biblical texts, namely their ancient nuances refer not to literal skin color, but figuratively to spiritual and emotional demeanors or countenances. Modern interpretations sometimes ignore the nuances of ancient texts, especially when removing those texts from their original context. We must avoid uncritically applying modern lines of thinking to an ancient text that appears to have lacked the overt racial implications sometimes attributed to it. I think that's like that's a great summary of like the importance of doing exegesis, and ties nicely into your articles and some of the comments you've made in this episode as well.
Yeah. That's a great book. I actually have that on my Kindle. So
yeah, it's an excellent book, and I really love the title as well. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
So, Adam, any other final comments before we end this episode?
So both of these, the Interpretive article is online. That's in public access. The Journal of Book of Mormon Studies article on 2 Nephi 5. It's a little harder to get to. You need like a JSTOR subscription to it. But it can't. But I would strongly recommend subscribing to the journal. There's a lot of good stuff in there. There's a lot of articles looking at the Book of Mormon in a variety of different ways. I come at the Book of Mormon from a very traditional, very conservative approach, but there's a variety of different approaches in there just to be knowledgeable with them. So very good stuff in both of these journals. I'm very honored to have written for both of them.
Yeah, and as I said, I will include a link to the articles on the show notes. I'll also include a link to the episode we did, as well as the official website of your particular denomination and your author page as well. So yeah,
Awesome.
but yeah, with that, again, thank you for coming on for the second time, and I'm also really looking forward to the modalism Christology discussion we'll have hopefully in the near future. I think that will
Bring
be
it on.
yeah, bring it on.
Looking forward.
But no, it will be friendly. But like because we're both nerds, I think we might need a moderator, so we won't be discussing like say the the weeds so much. I'm sure like if this was like a Hebrew Bible discussion, we kind of be discussing like Echad and the Shema a little too much. But
Yes, yes.
yeah, but something to look
Just
forward
all
to.
Greek and Latin.
Oh yeah,
Yes.
totally. But yeah, that's gonna be a fun discussion. But like, again, thank you for coming on. Really do appreciate it, and hopefully we can actually have you on as well in the stream when I move to the States to discuss the theology of certain Star Trek episodes like Darmok and a few others as well. So
That'd be wonderful. That'd be awesome. I'm
and we
always
can
up to
address like
talking
we're the
about Star Trek.
Bajorans, the Mormons of Star Trek.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Yes.
But yeah, with that, again, Adam, thanks for coming on, and hopefully we'll have you on again in the near future. So thank you and all the best.
Always a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks.